Best way to learn how to program is by writing programs. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to load up a compiler, and I will be using an online compiler um, just to make things simple. And what we're going to do, we're going to type up the class, type up the main program, and let you get an idea of what to expect. Also, let you get an idea of some of the common errors that you might find as you navigate the space. So I'm creating a new tab, and I'm going to go to onlinegdb.com. And once we are here, we want to select the language. The language that we are using, in this case, is C++. And it sort of gives us a template that we can work with. So the first thing that we want is to ensure that we have the appropriate library, which is IOStream. And what IOStream does is it provides us access to the cout command that is going to display information on the screen. So if I execute, then you should be seeing hello world in the output screen, because that's what line 13 is doing. It is telling the computer to display hello world by using the cout command. Cout means console output. Note that before the cout statement, we have std, which is essentially telling us where in IOStream, where in the library, we need to look to find the cout command. I'm going to streamline the program by making use of something called a namespace. Let's use the namespace. And the namespace in this instant is going to be std. And by doing that, we can simplify the program by getting rid of the std : : So let me change the message just to illustrate that it's working. So cout, hello, Mr. Scarlett. Let's execute. And there we have it. Hello, Mr. Scarlett is being displayed. All right, great. So now that we have the basic structure set up, we now want to go ahead and create the class. So remember, it is class ball. There's a begin, there's an end, there's a semicolon. So I'm going to go over to the compiler, and we are going to create that. So it's class ball, there's a begin, there's an end, and there's a semicolon. And inside the main program, I'm just going to create the object. So the object is going to be ball, my ball, semicolon. And we are going to execute. And we are seeing that there's no output, but the program executed properly. And that's what we want. So we have set up the structure for the class. Note that at the end, we need to have the semicolon. So if I get rid of that semicolon and I re-execute, note that we get an error. So the semicolon at the end of the class is part of the syntax. And if we fail to put it, then we will get a syntax error. So customarily, what we want to do, or what I recommend, is that you create the basic structure for the class first. And then you're now going to go inside of the class and type out the elements that you need to complete the class. In this case, we need to have the private section. And under the private section, we are going to have these variables or these properties. So we have private, colon, and under that, we have int radius. We have char star color. We have char visible. And the order in which you place these elements are not important. We have float area and we have as air. And remember, what we're doing here is we are creating the properties and we are just illustrating the basic data types that we can use when we create these properties. The next section to have is the public section. And under the public section, we're going to have our methods. In this case, we have one method called show details. Remember, a method is an operation. So the return data type or the return value is going to be void. This tells us that this function will not push out any output. It's called show details. All functions will have a parenthesis at the end. And then there's going to be a begin and an end. If the function does not take in any inputs or any parameters, then we simply leave it blank, meaning we leave the parameters, the parentheses blank in terms of not having in any inputs. And then we will now place the micro operations within the class. And in this case, let's just do a simple cout just to test that the show details is working. The show details is working. And we like to place a new line at the end. So let me just put the new line right there. And we need to terminate the command. Now that the ball class has an operation called show details, we can now make use of that within the main program. So it's the object name, which is my ball. Then we want to make use of the dot operator so that we can get access to the show details command. And if everything goes according to plan, then we should see a message in the output screen saying show details is working. So let's execute the program. And in the output, you are seeing that we have show details is working, which means that everything is configured properly thus far. Going back to the code that we're trying to flesh out, we want to display the radius preceded by a message. So note that we have one cout, but it's displaying multiple values. So let's do that quickly. So I'm going to put that new line underneath the show details is working line. So it's cout, and then we have the print operator, the two less than sign. So I just call it the print operator moving forward. So we have the print operator, then the message that we want to display in double quotes. So let's say radius is, we put a space, and then we put the print operator again. And this time we put the variable radius, the print operator again, and then we put the new line symbol. And we are now going to execute this and see what happens. And we are seeing here that it says radius is followed by the value inside of radius, which is 0. So by default, when you create your properties or your variables, the compilers usually put in some default values. So for integers, it will usually put in like a 0. And for strings, it will usually leave it blank. So please bear that in mind. I'm now going to place another operation so that we can update the content of the radius. So I'll call it void set radius. I won't take in any input for now, a begin and an end. And I'm going to say radius is assigned, let's say 25. Remember, single equal sign means that we are storing a value or assigning a value. So we're assigning the value 25 to the property called radius. Now, it's important that you understand that as we navigate through the main program and programming in general, the order in which you place the commands is going to be important. So if I go to line 40 and I now say my ball dot set radius, so I'm calling the set radius operation, and I execute the command, you will realize that the radius is still 0, just looking at the output screen. And the reason why the radius is still 0 is because in line 39, I would have shown the details for the radius. And then after showing the details for the radius, I would have gone ahead and then set the radius, which means the order in which I'm doing it is incorrect. I should have set the radius first, and then I show the details. Now, this is an example of what we call a logical error. So the program runs fine in terms of the fact that there's no syntax errors. But in terms of the kind of output that we are looking for, we're not getting the correct output because we have not organized the code in the correct fashion. So there are two types of errors. We can have syntax errors where your program will not compile and will not execute. And we can have logical errors where the program compiles, but when it's executed, it does not give you the kind of results that you're looking for. And in those cases, you have to go ahead and debug and find out what is wrong with the logic. So the simple fix to this is to take the set command and place it before the show details command. So I'm setting the radius, then I'm showing the details. And if we re-execute the program, now note, we have the value that says the radius is 25. So let's now upgrade this, because what this is saying is that every time I call the set radius operation, we will be placing the value 25 in the radius property. This will not be how we want the program to really work, because we would want the user to be able to set the radius with a value of their own choice. So what we need to do, therefore, is to update the set radius command so that it takes in an input. The input would then be provided by the user, and that input is what we want to now store inside the radius property. And in order to do that, we need to ensure that the set radius operation takes in parameters. So in this case, I'm going to create a parameter called r, which is integer. And we are going to set the radius to r. What it means is that in the main program, we will have to determine what the value of r is. And we do that by going to line 39, where we are using the radius, the set radius command. And then we can determine the value of r by placing the value within the parentheses. In this case, let's say we want it to be 5. So we want to set the radius to 5. We execute. And notice now saying that the radius is 5. So in the main program, we are now setting the value. And what this means is that it gives me some flexibility, because if I want the value of the radius to be 103, for example, then I will go into the main program. I will put 103 inside the set radius command. I will execute. And there we have it. The radius is now 103. So we have updated the set radius command so that it's more applicable to how we want the program to work in real life. And we update it by ensuring that we're taking in the parameters, the inputs, which are necessary for the set radius operation or method to work properly. All right, so what we can do is go ahead and fill out the rest, but I leave that for you to do as your exercise. The part that I'm going to focus on now is lines 28 going down, which has the if statement. So we are using the if statement to check a condition. And the condition in this case is going to be, we want to see if the value in has air is equal to true. Now bear in mind that when we use the double equal sign, then that is what represents equality, or that is what checks to see if two things are equal. So if has air is equal to true, then we want to display a message. And the message in this case is going to be, we want to say that the ball is inflated. So ball is inflated. And we put a new line at the end. Otherwise, meaning the else, otherwise, we want to print a message that says ball is not inflated. And we print a new line at the end. Remember that we terminate most of these micro operations with a semicolon. So line 27 is checking the condition. The property has air. Does it have in the value true? If it has in the value true, then it means that that condition is true. And when the condition is true, we execute the first command. However, if the condition is false, then we will execute the command that is associated with the else statement. We now need something or some operation that will allow us to set the has air property to either being true or false. So we are now going to create that below. So we'll create an operation called void. Let's call it set. Well, let's call it inflate. So inflate. And inside of inflate, so begin and the end, and inside of inflate, we're going to say has air is assigned the value true. And we're going to create a similar operation called deflate. Void deflate. So we must have the begin and the end. And we are now going to set has air so put in by the parentheses where it ought to be. And we're now going to say has air is assigned the value false. So remember, has air is a Boolean value. And a Boolean value can have one of two possible values. It can either be true or it can be false. In this case, the inflate operation or method is set in has air to true, whereas the deflate operation is set in has air to false. So we're going to now check that out in the main program. So my ball dot inflate. And by doing that, what we're actually saying is that we want to inflate the ball or set the has air property to true. And then let us show my ball dot details. Show details so that we can see the output. And let's execute. And now notice we're seeing several things. We're seeing show details is working, which would be the the first command that we had placed inside the show details method, followed by the radius. Radius is 103. We know that we had set it to 103. And then we check the condition. And we are seeing that it says that ball is not inflated. So by default, the ball was not inflated. And remember, we had said earlier that whenever we create variables, values are going to be stored in there by default, which meant that for the Boolean property or the Boolean variable, the value false was set in there by default. Now, in line 57, I'm now calling the inflate command, and then I'm showing the details for the ball again, which is why we're seeing another thing that says show details is working. Radius is still 103 because we have not changed the radius after we have set it to 103. And then it now says that the ball is inflated, which means that the inflate command was carried out successfully. What I'm going to do now, I'm going to kind of separate the outputs. So before the show details command, I'm going to put a C out, and I'm going to put a couple of new lines, 2 new lines, so that each time we see the show details command, there'll be some space before it so that we can know exactly what has transpired. We can separate the outputs from each other, in other words. So we are going to re-execute. And now note, I've kind of blocked the outputs together by putting in that extra C out with the new lines. So this first set of print statement is what would have been printed by line 57, whereas the second set of print statement is what would have been printed by line 61. So once again, we have set the radius to 103, and we have not changed that from that point onwards in the program. So it means that the value inside the radius property would be 103 in both cases. In the first instance, when we're looking at the has air property, we are seeing that the message says that the ball is not inflated. We have not done anything to has air in lines 55 to line 57, which means that by default, the has air property would have been assigned the value true. So that's the default value. In line 59, we are calling the inflate command, which is now going to set the has air property to true. Therefore, when we now display or execute the show details command again, then in addition to the radius being 103, we're now also going to see that the ball is inflated because the has air property would have now been set to true. Please take some time to go back through what has just transpired and look at how I've organized the program, and also look at the method that I've used in terms of organizing the program. So remember, the recommendation is you build out the class first by putting the begin and the end. And then after that, you go inside of the class and you build out the methods one by one. It is also recommended that you test very often. So after having written substantial pieces of code that you can execute and test how things are working, then by all means, you execute, you see what is working, you make adjustments as you go along. All right, so that's it for this session, and please stay tuned for the next.